Hey folks, this is Jay Frost speaking to you from wonderful Indianapolis, where the APRA conference is being held, and happy to welcome you back to the Philanthropy Mastermind series. If you've been following along, you know that I just came from London, where I had an opportunity to interview a number of folks there. One I didn't have the opportunity to interview there, I'll be introducing in a moment to you, since he was here in the States when I was over there. So our paths keep crossing, but we are very fortunate as a group to be able to learn from him today. And before I introduce him, I do want to welcome all of you and encourage you to keep doing what you're already doing in the chat. So thank you for that, which is to go ahead and say hello and maybe let us know where you're here from. I have seen Bostonians and others. So thank you all for making use of that. Please continue to do so throughout. That's a perfect sandbox for you. And while we will try to keep an eye on that throughout the session and hopefully engage with it, both myself and our producer, Jack. Additionally, we have the Q&A. That's a perfect place for you to list those questions that occur to you throughout, and we can mine those at the conclusion of the presentation today, which is CFRE accredited. So we will be looking for content in the chat, especially for your questions in the Q&A, and then to be able to address those at the conclusion of some slides here. So with that, I want to, of course, not only welcome you and welcome our presenter today, but thank our sponsor, DonorSearch, which has been sponsoring this series, the Philanthropy Mastermind series, since 2016. We have well over 500 programs, and you can learn all about both DonorSearch and their work with helping you understand your donors, as well as other programs in this series over under the DonorSearch website under the resources tab at donorsearch.net. So I'll tell you about that again at the conclusion of the program. But for right now, I want to jump right in and, of course, welcome Dr. Adrian Sargent. So Adrian is, as you may know already, the co-director of the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy, which is a hub of pioneering research in philanthropy, giving, and fundraising. His work may be familiar to you not only from his work there, but across the sector and across the globe. He leads the Institute's groundbreaking work in philanthropic psychology and donor well-being, but he has a rich academic background, as you probably know, and he's been a driving force in fundraising, having held positions as a professor of fundraising at the Hartsook Center for Sustainable Philanthropy and the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, which is right down the street. I won't tell you the rest of his biography because then he wouldn't have time to share with you today. So what I will do instead is invite him to unmute and come back on camera and welcome him to share with us today on the subject of relationship fundraising, new thinking, and ideas. Adrian, are you there with us? And I'm sure he'll come back on camera in just a moment. With that, and here he comes. There we are.
Here I am.
A little bit of suspense is always good. Thank you so much for doing this.
No, my pleasure. Let me share my screen here and go full screen on that. Okay, well, thank you for the invitation, Jay, and welcome everybody to a session on relationship fundraising, new thinking and new ideas. And what I'm going to do over the course of the next hour or so is to give you a flavor of, if you like, three ways of looking at relationship fundraising. Two, I suspect will be very familiar to you, but the third, I'm hoping will be new to most of you, because I'm going to talk about the science of identity, well-being, and love. And I'm going to suggest that maybe when we think about relationship fundraising, that we can be actively managing those ideas in the way that we communicate with our audiences. Now, relationship fundraising, of course, has been around a very long time. And for those of you who are familiar with Ken Burnett's groundbreaking text on the topic, you'll be familiar with this definition. So for Ken Burnett, relationship fundraising is an approach to the marketing of a cause that centers on the special relationship between a nonprofit and each supporter. And so the purpose of relationship fundraising is to care for and develop that bond and do nothing that might otherwise damage or jeopardize it. So when relationship fundraising was first mooted, we were taking care as a profession to treat people with a high degree of care and to try and find ways in which we can begin to build relationship bonds with supporters. So in the early 1990s, that meant things like saying a proper thank you and doing so within a reasonable period of time so that people know that the gift has been received and so forth. And because we were talking about the 1990s here, that they would take any check that you sent in and then they'd bank that immediately so that you knew that the money was going off to good use. We were also concerned as a profession of treating donors with respect, providing adequate recognition when that was appropriate, feeding back about how monies were used, being open and transparent about that, making sure that we respect donor wishes and donor intent, capturing data accurately so that we could do all of that good stuff, and of course communicating in a way that was reflective of their needs and reflective of who they are for the organization. So that's relationship fundraising 1.0. One of the other things that it gave us was donor surveys. So around the 1990s, you'd start to see information gathering taking place, finding out a little bit more about what those supporter needs might actually be. Back in the day, surveys were seen as a market research tool, and you gathered that data and you then took action based on that data. These days, of course, I think the perception of surveys has shifted a lot. Now they're seen not so much as an information gathering tool, but really as part of the stewardship process that we go through with donors. And of course, there are lots of different ways in which you can use surveys. I just thought I'd share a quick example with you. This is a mock-up of something that might go out from a humane society. And here they are asking me, what do you prefer to spend time with, Adrian? Is it cats? Is it dogs? Is it with anything fluffy and furry? Or are you more of a human person? Or it depends. And obviously, we can use that information to help us structure the way that we communicate. So at a fundamental level, if you know that I'm a dog person, you can build a relationship with me based on dogs. If you know that I'm a cat person, you can do likewise for cats. And that's kind of smart because it makes communications more relevant to me. But if you want to make that work for you in a relationship building sense, we know from psychology that you have to close the loop. So here I am closing that loop. Dear Adrian, I remember the survey you returned to me a little while ago. Thanks for that. In it, you told me that you preferred spending time with anything fluffy and furry. And then it goes off into whatever the purpose of that letter is. Now, that is super smart in terms of building relationships because it demonstrates to me that you listened, right? And it's that demonstration process of listening that drives an enhanced feeling of relationship. So donor surveys, hugely important tool. And of course, we can use them to inform all kinds of fundraising that we might be involved with. This is the sort of question I'd be asking about bequests. Why put that into a survey? Well, because you'll inevitably, even if you're surveying existing donors, find a few pledges that people have made that you didn't necessarily know about. So it's quite good to have a question on bequests in there. So bequests left to this charity by people in their wills are of enormous benefit. Many people like to leave money in their will or trust to our organization. These wonderful donors are members of our, and you can insert whatever the name of your society is. Have you done it yet? And of course, the answers are, yes, I've done it and I've included you. Hurrah. I intend to include you. I'll consider it, but not right at the minute. I've got a will, mentioned others, but not you. Don't darken my door. Right. And straight away, then you're beginning to get information that you can use for fundraising. Because if I put my hand up and said, yeah, I intend to, or I'd consider it, you're going to make sure that you're going to communicate with me over the coming weeks and months. And just finally, you can ask questions too about what I would call mid-level giving. So in a few months, we're going to run a special campaign to do whatever the special thing is. We're going to have a private phase asking supporters if they could pledge over $1,000. Is this something you'd consider doing in 2023? And the answers are yes, I'll consider it, maybe. It depends. Tell me a bit more. Not within 6 months, but maybe later. Don't darken my door. And again, we're getting out of that donor survey then information that allows us to begin to prioritize, right? Because if I'm saying, yeah, maybe I consider it, you can reach out to me and follow up. So surveys, stewardship tool, can inform the whole approach to annual fund fundraising. So that's relationship fundraising 1.0. 2.0 comes out of marketing and marketing science. And I'm sharing with you a quote here from two marketing professors, Morgan and Hunt. And they say that to the manager, understanding the process of making relationships work is superior to simply developing a laundry list of antecedents and important outcomes. Well, what they mean by that is that simply listing out, thanking people, banking, giving people some choice, all of those things in my list that I showed you a few seconds ago, that's not as powerful as understanding how people experience relationships. And we've known from research for probably 40 odd years now that relationships are experienced through three key dynamics: satisfaction, commitment, and trust. And certainly since the late 1990s, I've been banging on at fundraising conventions about the importance of these three elements, right? Because the more satisfaction you've got, the more commitment you've got, the more trust you've got, the more likely it is that people are going to give for extended periods of time. So there's felt to be a relationship between these things and how loyal people might be over the duration of their relationships with the organization. So they are hugely important. So as a profession, we started to include questions about them in our surveys. So we could ask donors how satisfied they are with the quality of service provided by the fundraising team. Not the service provided beneficiaries, but just simply how the organization is treating them as donors. And you can say that you're very satisfied, no opinion, dissatisfied, whatever. The key here is to get as many donors as we can into that very satisfied camp, right? Because people who say they are very satisfied with the quality of service provided by the fundraising team are probably about twice as likely to be giving to you next year as people who say they're just satisfied. So this is a huge dynamic in terms of relationship fundraising. These days, we also ask questions about commitment, because it turns out that people who are committed to seeing the mission of your organization achieved also more loyal over time. How do you measure commitment? Well, a lot of the companies that use this, including Donor Voice, ask by posing three questions of donors. And you can indicate the extent to which you agree with the statements that you see on the screen using either a 7 or a 9 or sometimes even a 10-point scale. And you can say, this is my favorite charity, I'm really committed to this organization, the work is really very important to me. Now, why would we gather that? Well, we can gather that to see if we've managed as a fundraiser to build the level of commitment over time. Right? So you can use it to benchmark, right? We've got higher levels of commitment this year than we had last year, and we can reward our fundraisers for that. But if you think back to the donor survey that I showed you a couple of seconds ago, imagine that you were asking that question in the donor survey. You'd then be able to overlay the answers to the commitment question on, say, the bequest or the mid-value giving question. So you could identify people who said, yeah, I'm really passionate about the work of the organization, and yes, I'm interested in leaving you a gift in my will. Who are you going to go out and talk to next week, right? People who are really committed and they've expressed the interest. So you're seeing a lot of surveys including these kinds of measurements now. And I would say I see surveys more as a sort of a stewardship tool. And so what you're looking at the screen is kind of a modern approach to doing that survey. This is a printed version, obviously, but you can see the beautiful picture there of the little girl. And it's all very much reflecting the brand of the organization, the values of the organization, and how they want their service users to be seen. They're beautifully produced, whether online or in print. Okay, so satisfaction, commitment, and again, trust. If you're interested, that's how I would measure trust. And again, you can benchmark your performance against that dynamic over time. What have we got from Relationship Fundraising 2.0? Well, nonprofits, by and large, I think, have begun to up their game. They've been measuring certainly commitment, certainly satisfaction. Sometimes these days people are measuring trust as well. So those measurements allow you to track how well you're doing over time, and that allows you to track improvements in the quality of service provided to donors. So there's that. There's also an argument that says, even if it weren't linked to things like loyalty, we'd still ought to be tracking the quality of service, because it's kind of the right thing to do. If people are giving us money, we want people to have a decent experience. And the third point, I think, to make here is that trust is truly important. It drives the amounts that people are willing to give to the organization, and loyalty. And so much of what we do in fundraising is based on trust. Having some base level measurement of that should be appropriate, really. But satisfaction, commitment, and trust as a model has its drawbacks. The key drawback is that it was designed years ago in the business world, where the dominant form of a relationship is exchange. I give you money, you supply me with something. So there's an issue with just taking ideas from the business sector and plugging them into our world. The second issue is that knowing that, let's say, your commitment score is 6.4 doesn't get you very far in terms of wondering what you could do to improve donor relationships, right? Certainly you can see whether that's higher or lower than last year, and you can do the benchmarking I mentioned. But actually, having a commitment score of 6.2 doesn't give you a key to what you might change in the way that you communicate to build giving, build relationships, make people feel better, whatever it is that your intentions might be. And the third point is that although I've been talking about satisfaction, commitment, trust, and the relationships with future giving, the model is better at predicting what people say they're going to do next year than what people actually do next year. So in the face of that, maybe we need to move on a little bit from these simple models of satisfaction, commitment, and trust, and do something that's a little bit more tailored to who we are as a sector. Now, before we leave donor relationship fundraising 2.0, I wanted to flag one other thing that it gave us. It gave us pronoun swapping. So there's a big understanding across the sector now, I think, these days, that we shouldn't be talking about us as an organization. And there's a difference, people like Tom Ahern would tell us, between corporate communications, which are about how great the organization is, and communications that are about how great the donor is. So in corporate communications, the favorite pronoun you're going to see is we. And here's an example from Mount Sinai Children's Hospital. I actually quite like this, despite the fact that it's got the we at the front there. If you're a parent, you'll be able to identify with this. We turned a child who couldn't hear into a typical 2-year-old that doesn't listen. It's just, yeah, I can identify with that, right? Of course, it would have been a lot better if they could say, thanks to you, your care, your love, a child who couldn't hear, and so on. Donor communications, favorite pronoun, you. You're amazing because of you, thank you. Not what we're doing in Pakistan, how we're helping survivors find out how we're helping. Big difference between these two types of communication. Donor-centric, with your help, all these amazing things happened, and without your help, they won't. Here's an example of what we would call donor-centric communication. This is a newsletter from Save the Children. How you're saving the world's children. Thanks to you, Raboo is eating and smiling again. And of course, you open it up and it's still all about you. Thanks to you, she's safe, she's getting the care that she needs. And Relationship Fundraising 2.0 did reorient the kind of communication that we would send out as a sector. The problem, though, is that we didn't really get into who the you is in those communications. That's where my notion of relationship fundraising 3.0 comes into the equation. Who are our donors? And there's a big difference between understanding as a fundraiser why people give to your organization and who they are when they give to your organization. And at that point, we're beginning to think about donor identity and what people might be saying about themselves when they give to your organization. Now, at the bottom there, you can see that we have some identities that are personal. So I might see myself as, handsome, smart, articulate, modest, all of those things, right? These are identities that we might have as individuals. We can also have an identity as a moral person. And that's important in fundraising because by and large, donors do see giving to support others as a moral activity. So they're articulating that moral sense of self that they have. We may also be articulating a relational identity. I might give as a loving son or as a loving daughter or a father or a brother. And it might be that identity that's prompting my giving. Certainly in many healthcare contexts, maybe I might support the local hospital because they took care of my dad, and I'm articulating that loving son entity when I make that kind of gift. Equally, I could have an identity that's associated with your organization. It's kind of a dream for fundraisers, really, that we begin to define who we are as donors through our support of the organization. So I could see myself as a supporter of NPR, National Public Radio. I could see myself as a supporter of Greenpeace or whatever the organization might be, right? There's an identity as a person who supports this organization. Social categories, well, that's identity in terms of things like gender, in terms of things like income, in terms of things like faith, and so on. Lots of social category identities. And then at a macro level, a societal identity. So I might see myself as European, American, Canadian, Asian, or any combination of those different things. Now, why do we care? Well, once we understand who it is that's giving to support the organization, we can talk to people as if they are those kinds of people, right? We can talk to their sense of who they are. So one of the things that we do at the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy is to capture the essence of who people say they are. And it's a lot easier than you might think to do that. And in fact, we pose just a couple of questions to do that. Typically, question number one is, what are the top 5 words that you use to describe yourself? And question number 2, what are the top 5 words that you use to describe yourself as a supporter of this organization? And this example that I've chosen here is a conservative-leaning political think tank. And here we are asking donors what words they use to describe themselves as a person and as a supporter of this organization. And you can see in the word clouds that people use slightly different words to describe who they are as a person from who they are as a supporter. Now, what do we do with that? Well, one of the things we could do is to use some of those words when we communicate, right? You will be talking to your donors right now as if they are some kind of person, right? Just by default, you have to do that when you communicate. You'll be using some certain words to describe who you feel your donors are. So why don't we get those words into alignment, right? Let's choose the words that donors would use to describe themselves and put those into our communication. So what I'm going to do is just share with you an experiment that we did where we have essentially 3 versions of the renewal to this think tank organization. The control version, where we don't get to do any playing, is just really simple. I've renewed my membership, or I am renewing my membership, and I'm enclosing my contribution. Right, that's the control condition. In the first experimental condition that you can see there, we found a way to build around that simple text to include some of the self adjectives, the words that people are using to describe themselves. And they're peppered in the text here. Now, it's not a perfect text, because usually when you do tests like this, you'd want the length of the copy to be pretty much identical between the different conditions. But I feel confident sharing this experiment with you because we've tested things in lots of different contexts and the same thing happens, right? So my first experimental condition, just seeding these self-objectives, adjectives. Second condition, seeding the supporter adjectives. Who are you? What words would you use to describe yourself as a supporter of the organization? So those are the three versions that go out. What we found is that in the control condition, the typical renewal rate to that communication is about 6%, right? 6% response rate. And you can see that that can be pumped up by almost 20% by using the self adjectives in that renewal letter. The effect is actually still pretty good if you use the supporter adjectives. That's still an increase of around 14% over what would otherwise have been achieved. That's a huge uplift in the amount of money coming into the organization, right? It's massive. Now, some of you might be sitting there thinking, well, yeah, you've talked about exchange rates, Adrian, but maybe the average gift sizes are a bit different between these groups. And of course, the answer is, well, no, they're not. So you're seeing a massive increase in giving, and all that's changed really is just those 4 words. So what this tells us is that identity is massively important, right? Once you understand who your supporters are, you can begin to communicate with people as if they were that kind of person. Now, one of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years is that what set of words I use might be a little different in each circumstance. So one circumstance is the difference between recruiting a donor in for the first time and servicing the relationship with that donor on into an extended period of time. The reason I say that is because it takes a while for the supporter identity to develop. At the point of acquisition, they're not really going to understand what it means to be a supporter of this organization. That won't have formed yet. So it's better to use the self words in the context of bringing people into the organization, what we would call donor acquisition in the trade. And then maybe the supporter adjectives as people have been giving for an extended period of time. And I think that's one way in which you can use those 2 sets of words. I'll show you one more example. This, I can tell you, is the Lyric Opera in Chicago. And here we are posing the same questions. And you can see that these folks see themselves as creative, thoughtful, caring, intelligent, curious, and so forth. What could we do with that? Well, I took a look at their legacy section in their website. And you can see it says, gifts in your will or living trust, deepen your connections. You want to leave money to the Lyric Opera. You also want the flexibility to change your will. In as little as 1 sentence, you can complete your gift. This type of donation, blah, blah, blah. Right? Now, aside from the fact that it's pretty dull text, it doesn't speak to me, right? It doesn't jump off the page as being something you wrote to who I am, to me. So how about rewriting it by inserting some of those self words? Right? Be a beacon of creativity, shining from Chicago across the USA and around the world. You can channel your curiosity and passion for the arts into your estate plans to help share the spectacle of the splendor of the lyric for generations to come. Yes, I can feel myself reaching for the pen at that point. Right? And the reason that's more powerful, aside from the fact that the copy is a little more lively, is that it's talking directly to my sense of who I am. And my goodness, if it applies nowhere else, my sense of who I am is going to be really important in the context of plan giving. So that's identity. The second component of relationship fundraising is well-being. And for me, there are 3 key elements of human well-being that can be provided by fundraisers. Now, the first on one level is kind of obvious, right? Connectedness. So one thing that we might do is try and build up connectedness, because as human beings, we feel really good about ourselves when we feel connected with others that we love or that we care about. And the greater that sense of connection we have with those others, the greater the sense of well-being we experience. So as a fundraiser, you're thinking, yeah, we could deliver on that, right? Because we can connect people to beneficiaries. Yeah, we could. But I might be a dog person, not a cat person. Remember my earlier example. So it might not just be beneficiaries, it might be certain kinds of beneficiaries, or these days we're more like to say communities, or certain kinds of communities. So what starts out sounding quite simple begins to get a little complicated. It also gets complicated because connectedness, I might not want connectedness with beneficiaries. It might be connectedness with your organization, because there's just so much love for you and your organization in my community. I just feel really good when I'm close to you. Equally, you might have a really charismatic and outstanding leader at the helm of your organization. And I look at her and I think, I just need to be close to this person. I feel good when I'm close to this person because she is inspiring in this field that I care about. And of course, if you're a person of faith, it may be that what you're desiring in your giving is connectedness to a God figure of some kind. Right? So fundraisers have to begin to unpack what kind of connectedness it is that they're going to build in communication. Second element of well-being is about competence. And in the context of philanthropy, by definition, what that is competence in articulating my love for others. And the better I feel at being able to do that, the more well-being I'm going to experience. Last one, autonomy, is about feeling as though you had a hand in making something good happen today. So this kind of ties back a little bit to that notion of donor centricity we talked about earlier. Is it the organization who's doing all these wonderful things, or is it me being facilitated to be able to do some of these wonderful things? Having a hand in making something good happen, having had a voice in making something good happen, the more autonomy or choice we have, the more well-being we experience. So those are the three elements of well-being that I think we can certainly look at addressing with our fundraising practice. Now, I'm going to show you some examples. So this is the Royal British Legion. And in the United Kingdom, this is the charity for our servicemen and women and their families. And every year, just as in the US, there's a celebration of the service that these folks have offered their country. So what you're looking at in this screen is a solicitation from the Royal British Legion. And you know that it's a solicitation because down here you can see a response mechanism. And I can fill in my credit card details and I can send in a gift to the organization. That's fine. What's interesting here, though, is the piece of card that you can see where my cursor's moving. And I'm showing you both sides of that piece of card in this slide. So on the one side, you see the poppy, which is the symbol of remembrance. And on the back of that poppy, you can see a little bit of space. And the idea there is that you would write your message of love to somebody that you want to remember or that you've maybe lost at a time of conflict, and you fill in their name and you send it into the organization with your gift. Importantly, you don't have to make a gift. It's enough to return the poppy if you want to, but of course most people, when they return the poppy, also make a gift to the organization. Now, what happens to the poppies when they're returned? Well, what happens varies a bit depending on where we are in the calendar. So what you're looking at is a picture of the Menin Gate in Belgium, which, if you know your World War I history, you'll know was the site of some pretty ghastly carnage about 105, 106 years ago now. Right, it's just a horrible, horrible conflict, took many, many lives. But you can see in the slide here that the poppies that we talked about have been taken and planted. and they've been planted at volume. And of course, the photography that results from that is just stunning, right? It's just a sea of poppies that have been planted. And if you can get a couple of attractive kids to walk through the foreground there, then, so much the better. It looks fantastic. Now, what's wonderful about this, of course, is that my poppy could be just that one there. That could be my message. So straight away, you're starting to feel a little bit of connection here with others that have maybe lost someone in a time of conflict, or that are remembering somebody that's dear to them. And your poppy is with them. But of course, the real connection that's being established in this example is between me and the person that I may have written that message of love for. Right? That's the real sense of connection that's being delivered here. And you won't be able to read the messages because they'll be too small, but you can just about see in this slide how spidery some of the handwriting is. Right? And you just know that for some of these people, this will be the last time that they get to write that message of love to somebody they've lost, maybe in a time of conflict. And the really beautiful thing is here that you facilitated that experience for them. You were able to build that sense of connection today. Now, on the one hand, you can say, well, it has nothing to do with fundraising, right? It's nothing to do with raising money for a good cause. On the other hand, it has everything to do with fundraising, right? Fundraising should be about stewarding the human capacity to love, not just about raising money for a good cause. Right? There's nothing wrong with that definition, but actually, I think fundraising can play a much more important role in our society, stewarding that human capacity for love. And that's exactly what they're doing here. Sure, they're raising money, but they're also very deliberately thinking about how they can contribute to the well-being of their supporter base today. Let me show you one other example. This is courtesy of Tom Ahern, chum of mine. And what you're looking at is a before and after of a newsletter from Children's Hospital System in California. On the left-hand side is before Tom got at it. So you can see it's called Momentum. And the headline says, "At Gillette, medical pioneers set the standards for spine care." And it drones on at great length about how fantastic the facilities are, how wonderful the doctors are, how great the nursing team are, all that. Will you give us $20? Well, no, but I will give you a nice round of applause, right? Because clearly you're brilliant. On the right-hand side of the screen, by contrast, it's now called Connections. How smart is that? I've just told you connection is a core ingredient of human well-being. This time, instead of it being all about them and their surgeons and the facilities and so forth, what we're looking at is a thank you note from the little Tanzanian girl that you can see there. And she's saying, thank you because you helped her to stand on her own 2 feet again. And if you look at the picture there, down at the, sorry, bouncing around. If you look at the picture down on the right-hand side there, you can see that this little girl was born with both her feet pointing in the wrong direction. This little girl could barely stand, much less walk. And thanks to your kindness, your love, your generosity, this little girl today is able to walk normally. And you can see the beautiful smile on her face there. And clearly she's smiling because she's able to walk unaided for the first time. But something else quite beautiful has happened to this little girl today. Somebody's taken her shopping. See the bags in her hand. Wonder what she's been shopping for. Yeah, shoes, right? And I have a 13-year-old. I can tell you that girls of that age, shoes are important, right? And you were able to make that possible for this little girl. How connected do you feel with that little girl at this point? How competent do you feel in articulating your love for others? Do you feel like you had a hand in making something wonderful happen today? Right? All of that dripping with the notion of human well-being. Now, newsletters, of course, you and I know, are known in the trade as soft asks. Usually we don't ask for money, and yet people send money. And actually, people send a lot of money sometimes in response to a newsletter. Well, that at Gillette Medical Pioneers raised an amazing $4,500. A thank you note from little Disawadi there, $49,600. Now you do the maths on that. What percentage increase is that? Right? It's about 1,000%. Simply by attending to the human well-being of our supporters. So the effect sizes in the work that I'm talking about here are not small, right? You get these things right, and giving grows, and sometimes grows quite dramatically as a consequence. Okay, so we've talked about identity, and we've talked about well-being. How about combining those in some way? And what I want to share with you is an experiment that did exactly that. So here we are with a faith-based organization. And what you're looking at is the response mechanism. Now, this is a mock-up of the response mechanism in a piece of direct mail. Actually, we've tested this in digital, and you can do exactly the same thing, and you get pretty much the same effect. Now, what's different here from a typical kind of response mechanism where you're just collecting the amounts and checking their details and so on, is that there are a couple of questions that have been inserted here, or rather statements. And we've come to call these lift statements. So the idea is, as a donor, you read through this stuff and you can affirm what is true for you. So please tick any of the statements below that are true for you. Yes, mending broken relationships connects me to God's heart. Yes, piecing together fractured lives is a vital part of what being a Christian means. Well, if we take the first statement there, mending broken relationships. Now, that's not a phrase we invented. That's something that came from the appeal letter or email itself, right? That's one of the core messages of the body text. And all we're doing is just dragging that forward and making it salient now in our response mechanism. And adding into that is the sense of connection, and connection in this case to God's heart. The second statement is about identity importance and how important being a Christian is. So the text here is about piecing together fractured lives. That again is not something we will have invented. That will have come from the appeal, and it's just being dragged forward and made salient here, the point at which somebody's making a giving decision. And it's tied to that notion of identity and identity importance. So I said it was an experiment. We would have had a control condition with neither of those two statements printed. We'll have had a second version with just the top statement, a third version with the bottom statement, and a fourth one with both of the statements. What do we see? Well, what we see in the control condition, that the response rate to this communication is about 1.5%. If you add in both the Christian identity and the connectedness statements, watch my lips, you can double the response. One thing I've learned over the last couple of years is that doubling giving is actually quite easy, right? Once you start playing with identity and well-being and love, those kind of effect sizes are within reach. Now, as previously, you could say, oh yeah, Adrian, but maybe the gift sizes are different between these different categories. Actually, no. The average gift size are presented on this slide, and they are statistically indistinguishable. So what you're looking at here is literally a doubling of giving simply by inserting a couple of statements at the point at which people are making their giving decision. Yes, this is true of me. Yes, this is true of me. I'm going to give you money today. Importantly, it's not just about raising money, right? Because it's also about making people feel good and affirming their sense of who they are. And we know from our testing, because we measured it, that these kinds of things boost the level of well-being that people experience. So people give you more, but they give more because it feels good to them. Here's another example, again, a faith-based organization. Yes, it's important to me that those suffering in whatever the region was that was the focus of this appeal can feel God's love. Now that's interesting because this time it's not connection between me and God's love, it's offering the chance for someone else to have a connection to God's love. And that's what's being primed in that first statement that you see there. The second one is also about connection in a sense. Yes, I want this charity staff and partners in the area who are doing the work to know my heart is with them. So connection between me and the people that are really doing all of the hard work. Same kind of test set up, and where you have both statements, you can see that we can effectively more than double giving this time, right? It's gone up from a 1% response rate to a 2.4% response rate. We've more than double giving. Looks like there are some variations of average gift size, but that's just because of a couple of outliers. Actually, I reached the same conclusion as previously, which is that the average gift sizes are pretty much indistinguishable. So when we're looking at a doubling of response, we are literally looking at a doubling of the amount that we're able to generate. Okay, I'm coming around to the final bit, or the final chunk of my presentation today, and that is to bend your ear about the kind of language that we use in fundraising communication. Often we talk about donations, of course we do. Talk about gifts, thanks to your gift of, thanks to your support, due to your investment. And really what we mean is money, right? And the predominant kind of language we use is about money or some kind of investment. I think we could maybe remember that by definition, philanthropy is about love, right? The core of philanthropy is about love. So maybe we could start talking about love just a little bit more than what we do at present, so that we move people away from the sense that really all we're interested in ultimately is money. Now, I've chosen this just simply because we're going to see a lot of matches in the run-up towards the holiday period and end-of-year campaigns and so on. And of course, you know, there's a lot of this stuff out there. 2 times match in effect for the next 48 hours. Give now, and you'll be able to double your impact. End-of-year gifts match, says the Asheville Humane Society. A cute chappie there, staring at me, hoping that I am going to send a gift in so that it can be matched to take care of his welfare. Giving Tuesday, on this Worldwide Day of Giving, every dollar you give will be matched thanks to a 50,000 matching gift grant. You see all the money that's laden throughout all our communications. I struggle to find a love-based example, but here's one from the UNHCR. Your love is going to be matched. And of course, unfortunately, it goes on to talk about doubling impact and so on. But it's a start, right? They're talking about love. I think it's important to say that this is more than just semantics, right? Immediately you start to talk about love, communications become an awful lot warmer. So I just wanted to share this little example with you. You know, consider the difference between saying, a sick child in Yemen needs you, which is nicely donor-centric, but it ain't nowhere near as warm as sending your love to a sick child in Yemen. That's the same message, but it's not really, is it? Because it's altogether more intimate and warm to be talking to the love that actually is what's being articulated here. Now, I know some of you probably sat there thinking, yeah, that's nice, Adrian, but I can't see our board liking us talking about love. You know, we're a bit kind of stiff upper lip. We don't like talking about love. Well, here's the good news, right? You don't need to use the L word to talk about love. Here's a little example from Volunteers of America. Just the beginning to one of their letters. It says, with the holidays fast approaching, your Volunteers of America, whatever the region was, has been working overtime to help struggling families throughout the many crises caused by COVID-19. Compare that with, it's hard to believe the holidays are just around the corner. A time filled with joy and blessings. You've been one of our blessings, and we're so grateful. Now, whether they use the L word or not, you know that that opening is about love, right? It's about the love that I may be articulating through my support of the organization. So they're speaking to it, even if they're not actually using that L word. I'm going to share another example with you. Do you remember the little baby Raboo example that I showed you ages ago? One of the ways I think we could be doing better as a sector is to be actively thinking about what kinds of love it would be worth talking about and who that love should be between. Now, I think this is quite a nice newsletter. Certainly, it presses a lot of the right buttons. It talks about baby Raboo, his story, and what I've been able to do as a donor to be able to help that child. So in a sense, it's talking to my love for the little boy that was represented in the money that I would have given to receive this newsletter. Well, that's perfectly powerful, right? But another way of looking at it, which I think would be even more powerful, is to talk about the dominant love here, right? Yeah, I might have love for this little boy, but it pales into insignificance beside the love that that mother, Fatima, that you see there, has for her little baby boy. And you know that she has sacrificed a lot to get him to the Save the Children Centre so that he can get the help, right? She's fretted about the family that she's leaving behind. She's worried about how they're going to survive in her absence, how they're going to cope. She's probably walked miles to get to where she needs to be. She's fretting all the time that her child is getting sicker each day. You know, she has an immensely interesting story to tell, and it's a love story, right? Because she's embracing that suffering to get her little boy the help that that he needs. It would have been so much better, I think, here to be talking about that love, and then for me to be able to walk alongside Fatima, you know, not giving out of my largesse to help this little child, but to walk with Fatima to get this child the help that he needs. Right, so being a bit more thoughtful about where we see relationships and what kind of love we talk about, I think would be hugely powerful. Equally, I think we can be talking about how warm that love should feel. This is a little example from Vida Joven, which is an orphanage in northern Mexico. And as part of one of their thank yous, they say, if you've got time to read only this, please know this is how your love feels to the children. And you can see that massive embrace, right? That's how your love is experienced by the kids at Vida Joven. And the final point I'd make is that we can talk about what love can deliver. Now, love often in our world is talked about as being warm and joyful and sometimes fluffy. And certainly the way that Vida Joven communicates is a little fluffy because it's about kids and their dreams and their aspirations. And it's just kind of how things are. But we can still use that love to take on pain, right? Or take on, in this example, fear. And I'm just going to read it to you because I think it's a beautiful expression of that. Thanks to you, Maria now gets plenty of nutritious, delicious food each and every day. When she first came to the orphanage, Maria, like all the kids, didn't trust there'd be any meal beyond this one. So she gobbled, hoarded, anxiously asked for more, more, more. But with time, Maria is learning to trust that there'll be food tomorrow just as there's food today. Such trust is a pretty extraordinary thing. That's precisely what you make possible for Maria. This is the section I think is stunning. It says, the world used to be hard-edged and cruel for Maria. Now, thanks to you, this little girl's world is as sweet as a ripe mango and as comforting as chicken soup. Just feel the impact of your love in that statement in a way that is just beautifully warm. Well, as an institute, we have a lot of data about the impact of identity and the impact of well-being on giving, on donor retention, and the level of well-being that donors experience. And I can tell you, I can share lots of evidence with you along those lines. This year, we're working to build more evidence of the impact of love. And so in 12 months' time, I'll be able to share with you some numbers based on the impact of talking about love in the various ways that I've described. But let me tell you that from some of the early work that we've been doing, love is equally as powerful as these other two elements here. So I've talked about a lot in this presentation today. I've talked about the early thinking in relationship fundraising, stewarding relationships, taking the right actions to make people feel good about their support. I've talked too about how relationships are experienced and the notion of satisfaction, commitment, and trust, and maybe managing those dynamics to help build loyalty to the organization. I also pointed out some of the weaknesses of that approach and introduced the notion to you of relationship fundraising 3.0. Rather than satisfaction, commitment, and trust, maybe we could be drawing on learning from our own sector, not the business world, and start thinking about managing elements like identity, well-being, and love. And unlike satisfaction, where we end up with like hard numbers, with identity, well-being, and love, we've given signposts to how we can improve the stewardship of relationships. And hopefully over the course of the last hour, I've given you at least some ideas for the ways in which you can enhance those relationships, raise more money, but also make people feel really good about who they are through the support of the organization. Thank you, folks.
Thank you so much, Adrian. We have a lot to think about here, and we already have a good number of questions. So can you take a few minutes to tackle some of these?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, and if you want, you can feel free to close your deck.
I'm just trying to work out how to do that, to be honest.
And while you're doing that, let me just gear these, line these up. I know we had some early on. So if you have a question now and you haven't had a chance to ask it yet, please do put it in the Q&A. I want to make sure we don't miss it. So the first one that had come in really quite early, might be good to revisit, had to do with the word clouds that you described. And you showed them, I think, first in those American maps, the US maps, and then in other things as well. And the attendee asked whether you pre-populate the word choices for people to describe themselves, or if those questions were open-ended.
That's a really smart question. And it's smart on a couple of levels. We ask people to give us 5 words, and that's very deliberate. Right? If I ask you to give me 5 words to describe who you are, you can do that pretty easily. If it went up to 9 or 10, you'd struggle. And at that point, we start to, instead of stewarding relationships, we start to irritate people, right? Because we're asking them to do stuff that is kind of difficult for them. So if you take that route, I wouldn't ask for any more than 5 adjectives. But the whole point at that juncture is that they offer those 5 words themselves. And then what we do when we get the data in is, of course, we look for patterns in that data, matching pseudonyms and all of that good stuff, so that we can generate the words that are reflective of self, or if the organization's asking it, reflective of the organizational identity. So it isn't a pre-populated list, it's something that they get the opportunity to specify for themselves.
Sure. And the next question that came in after that had to do with ethical issues. And in fact, I wanted to ask you about this myself, in that the pictures that you used were largely positive images, but there are still questions about, among some, about the ethical issues involving in using disabled, sick, or disadvantaged children. For example, the child whose feet were reversed, and then through the surgery they were repaired, it's much easier for her to walk. If you have thoughts about any kind of ethical issues in regard to that, especially in the things you didn't show, that we've seen for over many years. Children who are quite ill, animals who are in cages, these kinds of images. What are your thoughts on that?
I've heard a lot I've been around a long time now. I've been in fundraising for 30 years. There used to be a school of thought that said that, well, you have to show negative images to get people to the point where they'll take action. Over the last decade or so, I think we've managed to build quite a lot of evidence that really isn't true. If you start to talk about identity and well-being and love, that can be just as powerful as a negative image, and it doesn't leave people with negative feelings, right? They should feel good about making a donation, not less bad. So given a choice, I wouldn't be using unnecessarily negative images. I think it's okay to show the need, but there's a difference between showing need and showing images that are, particularly distressing. On the point of an image such as the Tanzanian girl that I showed you earlier, I think it would be good for boards to form a view on what is appropriate for their organization. I don't think the selection of imagery is something that should be left just to a fundraiser to be taking difficult decisions about. I think it's so important these days that it should be something that's discussed at board level, so that there's some kind of policy as to what kind of image we're going to use. And then within that, of course, you do nothing without consent, and you do nothing which will reinforce any negative stereotypes, and you do nothing which deprives the folks in that communication of their agency. And you'll judge from the communication from Save the Children I showed you about baby Raboo, that I kind of felt that the mother in that example was having agency kind of stripped from her in a sense, because it was me that was making the magic happen, not her. And that makes no sense to me. It's just not appropriate to do that. She was the one who got her child to the point where he could be aided, not me. So there's a wide range of ethical issues that those things raise, I think, and I think it should be a board which broadly sets the parameters within which fundraising can operate, because ultimately it's a serious enough decision that it warrants being discussed at the level.
Absolutely. One practical question, Adrian, are these slides something that you're willing to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, our role as the Institute is to try and disseminate the research as widely as possible.
Thank you for that. And what we will do is then, if you'll share those with me, I'll make sure that we distribute them to those who attended today. But additionally, as Jack said in the chat, a recording of this session will be posted to the DonorSearch site at DonorSearch.net, as well as to the DonorSearch YouTube channel. So you can be on the lookout for that. But watch your email, because that's where you'll both learn about future sessions, as well as get a copy, or at least a link to this slide deck. So please, if you don't see something come through your email, look in the spam or just contact me. My name is Jay, it's Jay, at DonorSearch.net, or you can reach out to anybody at DonorSearch and they'll be happy to help you. We also have a couple of other questions here. One was about the life statement example, which Chuck had thought was really terrific, and asked about planned giving or planning giving statements, messages, or options. And you talked a little bit about some of these things here, but I was wondering if you have any thoughts on the planned giving component or applications of some of what you've learned through this research.
Oh, I think identity. I mean, anything that speaks to the core of who we are. If ever there were anything that did that, it's sitting down to decide what you want to happen to your assets after you've gone, right? And we know that a lot of people like to feel as though a part of who they are can live on past their physical passing. So the fact that they care about animals, the environment, whatever, can live on past death. So you can be using the same kind of lift questions in the legacy context, although there you're probably getting people to flag an interest, receive a brochure of some kind, or allow themselves to be contacted by a planned giving fundraiser. So the actions that you're looking for are obviously a bit different, but there's no reason why you shouldn't be using the right language in the communication that reflects their sense of who they are, and maybe even a lift question in the response mechanism that allows them to affirm how important saving lives is to them, or how important opera has been in their lives. All of those things will boost the response that you're able to generate. Where we've done it, again, doubling the response is really not unusual.
I did want to ask you about the effects on retention. Is that something you've been able to measure yet? For example, the lift statements, which work so well on acquisition initial gifts. Do you keep utilizing those? And have they had an effect on retention, which is, the kind of the biggest challenge that we have?
Yeah, it's interesting you raised that. We did some research last year and this, looking at what it is that drives donor loyalty, what I say I'm going to do next year, and what drives actual donor behavior, so donor retention. And we administered a survey, and then we waited a year, and then we appended the subsequent giving behavior to our survey responses. So that in plain English, we can see out of all the factors that we researched, what was driving how people actually behaved a year out. So it's kind of a longer term project. But what we found is that the factors that drive what I say I'm going to do are a bit different from the factors that drive what I actually end up doing. And it turns out that satisfaction, commitment, and trust are better measures of what I say I'm going to do, so my feelings of loyalty, whereas identity, well-being, and love, better predictors of actual future behavior. So once you've got that understanding of donor identity and what's going to make those kinds of people feel good, I think you continue to drip that kind of language right through all your communications, so that you can maximize that effect, right? Once all of your communications are oriented around saying pretty much the same thing about who I am, and oriented around providing me with the kind of well-being I need as that kind of person, that will punch that future retention up.
Right. I guess it's almost like you don't just buy flowers for someone that you have an affection for initially and then forget flowers for the rest of their lives. You have to keep reminding them that you care. So I suppose that reminding them of that identity component must be really important. But I'm glad to hear that that's being reinforced by the research as well.
Yeah, when you use an analogy, it's it sounds kind of obvious, doesn't it? We understand the right way to talk to people. We understand the right way to make them feel good. Let's do more of that. And then, surprise, surprise, they're going to be more likely to behave in ways that we're hoping they will at the end of the year.
And then we did have a question. Let me see. Oh, no, there was another question about the PowerPoint. So we have tackled that one. I know there are other things that may have come through the chat. And so if we have missed those, I apologize. But we'll make sure that anything that came in that way will also be sent on to Adrian. So perhaps there's an opportunity for discussion there. And Adrian, can you share how people can reach you, or maybe more aptly, follow the work that you're doing, access the research that you are sharing, learn more about the writing that you're doing?
I'll include a slide at the end of the deck with my contact details on the links to our report page. Everything we produce is free to air, so you can go in and access whatever materials you want to. And we also provide training in philanthropic psychology and copywriting through the philanthropic psychology lens, and you can read more about that on our website if you're interested.
And would you mind just providing orally the URL as well? And we'll put that in the chat right now, and then it'll also be in the slide deck, of course.
Yeah, it's www.philanthropy-institute.org.uk.
Thank you so much. And Jack, if you can put that there, if that's possible, that would be great. Of course, we'll make sure that's in the show notes for YouTube as well. But I want to thank you so much, Adrian, for doing this today. And of course, it'd be a pleasure to have you come back about anything at any time. And particularly as you're continuing to do this research a year out, it'd be wonderful to hear the other things that you learned along the path. And also to learn if you're finding adoption, because one of the challenges with any of this work that you are doing and others are doing is to make sure that organizations embrace it fully. That, as you said, the analogies sometimes make it clear, but that doesn't mean that people do what they need to do. You've laid out such a beautiful case for us to embrace the language of love. I hope that you're finding organizations are willing to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a journey right now, but I think it's a journey that the sector is kind of open to. There is a lot more of a kind of dialogue now taking place about how we should best kind of steward relationships with donors, but also raise money in a way that is consistent with the needs of communities,
Right.
and in ways that are not exploitative of those communities and the things that we talked about a moment ago.
Again, thank you so much for being willing to share all this today. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of this and reviewing the rest of this, as I'm sure everyone here is. So please, once again, just as a reminder, go to DonorSearch.net under the resources tab, where you're going to find recordings of this session as well as dozens and dozens of others, and look for the link in your email for the slide deck. But also, if you're not on the list to learn about sessions like these, I hope you will sign up for that list. You can do that right on the DonorSearch page at DonorSearch.net. And we have sessions coming up as soon as next week, as well as a recording just done here at the APRA conference in Indianapolis, with a number of members of the board, including the current president, the immediate past president, and the next president of the organization, talking about the future of research of APRA and also the work that it's doing. So I hope you'll look for that. That'll be great for your ear, and that'll be coming out in just the next couple of weeks. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here. Of course, thank Adrian Sargent for sharing today, and we'll look forward to seeing you all soon. Until then, take care.